Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Hannah Crepeau. I'm the Content Marketing Manager here at Certiport. We're happy that you're taking time out of your afternoon to learn with us today for our Certified Academy Design session. Please feel free to drop into the chat. We always, of course, love to see where everyone's coming from, what areas of design you represent, and the students that you work with so that we can all get to know each other a little bit better. We'll also be using the chat and the Q&A for you to ask questions to our panelists today. So feel free to drop in the most difficult questions you can think of, and we'll make sure to, to have those addressed as we go throughout our session today. Now, this session is being recorded, so all of our registrants will receive a link to the full recording after our presentation has wrapped this afternoon. Everyone is currently on mute, so again, if you have questions, feel free to drop into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll make sure to include those questions in our conversation today. Now, this session is being sponsored by the Adobe Certified Professional Certification Program. Now, we know that the future belongs to those who create. Now, whether it's to inform, persuade, entertain, or inspire, success in the digital age means communicating in visually rich and interactive ways. With a firm grasp on the world's most powerful creative tools, Adobe certified professionals are ready to make their mark. And I will drop into the chat here shortly a link to learn more if you're unfamiliar with the Adobe Certified Professional Program, a link so that you can check a little bit of that out. And today we are taking a peek into the world of AI and the impact that it has on the world of design. And we'll be discussing this topic with two wonderful panelists from the University of Central Florida. Our first panelist is Matt Dombrowski. Matt is an associate professor at UCF and art director for the UCF nonprofit Limitless Solutions, whose mission is providing cost-free, accessible solutions to underserved communities. He leads an interdisciplinary student team in the creation of 3D printed, visually expressive bionic arms and video game training for children with limb difference. His work has been featured by Adobe, TEDx Youth, Huffington Post, Gamma Sutra, Fast Company, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, GDC, and you're going to have to help me with some of these as well. The SXS, South by Southwest, EDU, and the Gates Foundation. Matt is an Adobe education leader and an Adobe partner by design. Our second panelist is Rudy McDaniel. Dr. Rudy McDaniel is a professor and director of the School of Visual Arts and Design at UCF. His research focuses on digital ethics, technical communication, and game-based learning. Rudy publishes regularly on these topics, and his recent books include Understanding Digital Ethics, Cases and Contexts, and Designing Effective Digital Badges, Applications for Learning. Now, we are very excited to have these wonderful guests here with us. So without further ado, what I'll do now is I'll stop sharing and allow them both to introduce themselves. So Matt, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Hi. Yeah, thank you, Hannah, so much. It's always great to chat at these academies and welcome everyone in the audience. We're thrilled to be here. I'm kind of coming in today from kind of a two-pronged perspective when it comes to AI. I'm not only, as Hannah mentioned, an art director at Limitless, where we use AI in some of the involvement of our video games and gamified training and design elements, but we also are definitely seeing it in the higher education community. So we're excited to talk about all the pros and the cons and everything in between today. So thanks for having me.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Matt. And Rudy, we'll come over to you next.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's great to meet you all and be part of this event. So I'm a professor and director at UCF. I work with Matt. I've been doing this for about 20 years and about 12 years of those in higher education administration. So I'm particularly interested in the implications of AI on kind of training students and giving them the skills they're going to need to succeed in the future when AI becomes even more prevalent and useful. And, you know, you can see that happening already with the funding some of these giant technology companies are pouring into AI and AI research. So it's a fascinating topic. And I'm also more broadly interested in digital ethics beyond just AI and how we need to think carefully about the technologies we're using and how we teach our students with those technologies.
Absolutely. And I know that we'll dive into both of your areas a little bit this afternoon. So first, I wanted to talk about AI kind of in general. And we know that it's making its way into all areas of our lives. To Rudy's point, it's a huge investment point for a lot of these tech companies. So I wanted to get initial thoughts about using AI specifically as a design tool. So Rudy, we'll come to you first.
Sure. So I think one of the most interesting things about AI, from my perspective, is rapid prototyping of ideas. So being
Mm,
able to really quickly experiment with different concepts, different aesthetics, different genres even, and then come to a conclusion about the future direction of design based on that prototyping process. So it's also interesting, I think, when you bring together interdisciplinary teams with different skill sets. So for example, I'm teaching a course on honors video game design right now. It's an interdisciplinary seminar, and our students come from all different majors. So we have biology majors, chemistry majors. So not everyone has an artist in their group.
mm,
So for them to come together, think about a game design concept, and be able to introduce some of these AI tools to generate thinking not only about art, but also about storytelling, about the organization and framework of their design. It's really, I think, a leveling technology that allows a lot of different people to have agency in the design process.
mm.
That's part of what I find interesting and positive about AI in design.
So I'm going to ask then a follow-up question, because I love that you've touched on some of the benefits of AI. What have you seen in your experience with working with AI as a design tool so far as a potential pitfalls, especially as it relates to the students that you work with?
Sure. So I think one thing is definitely misattribution of other artists' work. So
Mm,
depending on where the content is being sourced from, and it's not always clear where the art is coming from, what's the data set it was trained on. Certainly bias could be an issue if the data is homogenized or of a certain type. There's the potential for bias design to come out as
mm,
well. Copyright infringement, plagiarism, misattribution, a lot of the things that we see in other types of content too, including just writing, citation of research, all of those
mhm.
can also be introduced when using AI. It's just not always as clear even where that information is coming from or
Yeah.
whether it's valid or accurate, right? You're seeing things that are either purposefully or unintentionally introduced that are flawed in some of the content you get back from some of these systems as well.
So that dives into, of course, the digital ethics that you mentioned earlier, that AI, I think, whether purposefully or unintentionally misappropriated, I think can have a huge impact on the broad application of that information. So I'm really glad that you touched on that.
Yeah.
Matt, I wanted to come over to you to get your thoughts. Let's talk about AI as a design tool. What are the benefits that you've seen in using AI in design so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, a lot of what Rudy said about the ideation, about the ability for kind of students to visualize things quicker and faster. And, all of our students, and this is, you talked, Rudy, about the leveling of everything. Um, all good technology has that, right? When the
Mhm,
internet came out, there was a level up, right? We would go to the library and then there would be this vast source of ethically untapped things, which may
mm,
still occur, right? But
Mhm.
it was a point where our students would now not only go to the library, they still do that, that library is still there, but they also go to the internet and they search the internet. Now they're just kind of leveling up there a little bit and going and using AI to kind of help that process. So, and we'll talk about this more a little later, I'm sure, but I think with the benefit with our students, it's allowing them to kind of get a jump start on that visualization, that storytelling, the ability to kind of go, okay, it's in my mind, how do I get it on paper? And
mm,
also, it for me, it acts as a communication tool. How do you write a prompt that specifically gives you what you're looking for? And that is a huge skill for any student, whether we were talking about AI or not, being able to
mhm,
communicate their work, communicate their effort, and talk about, hey, this is the purpose of why I'm trying to make this design, and this is why it's impactful. But now they're kind of getting that head start and that practice, writing these prompts. And, that's an area where my visual arts students struggle. They make
mm.
beautiful things. They don't write about their things really about, in a good manner sometimes. So it's kind of helping them kind of tap into a resource and a tool that they previously didn't
Mm.
develop as much.
So then, in thinking about the pitfalls, then you talked about some of the benefits. What are some of the things you've seen with your students that are the pitfalls of using AI in design?
Yeah, I think, there's kind of two folds to this question. The pitfall I see with AI is, as in any new technology, there's development, there's growing pains. I'm a huge advocate for the disabled community, and we talk a lot about the limb difference community. I'll be very honest, creating limb different individuals using AI generators is not appropriate. and it
Mhm.
has work to be done. And a lot of technology has that when it comes in,
Mhm.
and it doesn't excuse it, but again, it's a constant evolution as we go through. So that's kind of the side of things that I see, and Rudy touched upon that quite nicely about the bias and things that can come out of that
Mhm.
as well. I think, from my student standpoints, it really separates the the students who typically cannot kind of like, and any student's going to do this. So I'll actually take it out of visual art. If a student's going to plagiarize with paper,
Mhm.
they're going to plagiarize with paper.
Mhm.
And they're going to, copy it, paste it, do whatever they have to do, go to Wikipedia and pull it and drop it in. And I think those same students still are going to do that using visual art and AI. To be honest with you, our students, not all of them, and I'm talking like 0.5% out of the thousands that we teach in our school, can go to Google Images and take anything right now.
Right.
So to me, it's not really like dangling anything in front of them going, hey, you should cheat here or you should cut corners. I think for them, the ones who are going to do that are going to do that.
Right.
That comes down to 21st century skills, ethics. That comes down to teaching them self-awareness and understanding also they don't need to be great at everything.
Mhm.
And if they have a tool that helps them get to a better quality finish, that's going to be really important. But I think just like with any good technology, do they dive in? Do they take it? And then they go, oh, look, it's mine. I think it's more than that. I think it's about taking the product you get from AI, transforming it, scaffolding it
Yeah.
onto other things, not just put it to the printer, print it out and say,
Yeah.
hey, I'm done. And I noticed a lot of my students don't do that. They use it as part of that scaffolding to
Yeah.
get to that bigger creative idea.
And I think you both touched on this, just the rapid prototyping. So being able to leverage it as a tool, not necessarily as creating the final deliverable, which I think is really valuable. And so my next question, I wanted to kind of dive into that aspect a little bit more. How are you and your students using this in the classroom? So Matt, we'll come to you first, and then Rudy will address you next.
Absolutely. Yeah, for AI in general, not so much the art side, but when we make our video games at Limitless, we have different AI things happening in the background with the programming to kind of make this kind of endless level. We have a little endless runner that we have where the kids flex and they learn how to use their bionic arms, and the level gets and adapts as the game gets longer and longer, right? So like the different obstacles will change place based on that learning and that machine learning, which is really nice. On the student side, concept art. I mean, I have an awesome bunch of students. They're all in their senior year working on big group films. And I had a student group who wanted to work on a sci-fi film. And when they Google sci-fi films to get inspiration, it's all metal hallways, silver, right? Very like, looks straight out of Alien or straight out of any Star Trek movie that they may have seen. What they did was generated a ton of concept art using AI and kind of started putting different prompts and different spins on things. And they ended up with a really kind of retro futurism from the 60s sci-fi look to their actual final film. And I think that's really important because it's something that a group of students who were born post 2000, right?
Right.
Who may have not had like access to the films I grew up watching and some of the kind of like the old Star Trek, right? Things like that, where they could kind of go, oh, I'm kind of inspired by that. They all of a sudden had a new well of resources where they could come up with something fresh and new. And it looked nothing like what they did when they typed sci-fi ship in Google. And that was a big deal to them. And they were hesitant to tell me. They would kind of like, I saw them like at their computer and I was like, what are you looking at? You never know, right? And I walked over and they were like, well, we don't know if we should tell you. And it was almost like they had done something wrong, but they weren't turning it in. They weren't taking that concept art and matching it identically. They were, I praised them. I brought the whole class over and I said, hey, this is, if you're stuck, creatively problem solve and push forward. So those are some of the fun things the students are currently doing right now, kind of in that field.
I like that you touched on, though, how the students almost at this point don't know how to use it as a tool, and they're afraid to use it as a tool, because I think that's something that comes from the culture of your classroom is how do we treat this kind of pioneering technology? Are we going to teach it? Are we going to leverage it? what are our thoughts about it? So I really like that you've touched on that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But Rudy, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about how are you and your students using AI in the classroom?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. But if I could touch on something that you just mentioned and
Yeah,
Matt actually
please.
mentioned earlier, which is kind of the technological literacy of being able to write the prompts that produce what you're looking for, I think is such a critical part of this. And it's almost like stealth learning, I think, with the AI, because the students are almost learning things about tone and composition and lighting and the different artistic genres that they would pick up from art history classes as they're communicating with the AI prompts to create this concept art or whatever it might be. So I think that's another benefit that we've kind of touched on a little bit, but it's a really critical part of using this technology, because once you can write the prompts and then explain it in a way that, makes sense to get the outputs that you're looking for, you've actually learned quite a bit about the process of art and
Yeah,
design.
it almost masters a different skill set, right? It teaches
Right.
them in a different avenue. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, but you have this big reward at the end where you get to
Mm,
see what the output of that is. So it's
yeah.
yeah, it's very cool. So a lot of what Matt has talked about, we do as well. I mentioned the interdisciplinary seminar that I'm teaching on honors game design. So we do a lot of concept art in that class. Some student groups will do generative exercises using Midjourney or some of the other tools to kind of create a tone and atmosphere for their game. So not even necessarily the art that would be in the game, but the type of ambiance or, one of the areas that games excel in terms of storytelling is environmental storytelling. So what is the emotion you want the player to feel in this particular area, rather than like exposition or character dialogue, things that you would see in a film or a novel. Games are all about the environment and the immersion and kind of telling the story just based on what you're seeing. So that's one big area that we we encourage the students to use AI for, is just generating that kind of atmosphere for the look or the theme or the aesthetic that they're going for as they're creating the game. And then there's a lot of exercises in which art is not the primary thing that we're studying at a given moment in the semester. So for example, maybe we're talking about player cueing, different ways of orienting a player towards a certain part of the level or a decision being made or something happening. And cueing is really what we want them to focus on. Or maybe we're talking about artificial intelligence and how AI is going to work in this particular environment, or the critical path, or multiplayer. So all of these things require a sandbox to work in. And if we can quickly create artistic assets that can go into that, then they can develop mock-up scenarios or, spend their design time working on those other things that we also want to teach them in the class, that are not necessarily going to suck up hours and hours of time in terms of generating the artistic assets and all of the many things that have to go into something like a 3D level or a 2D level, which, we teach whole classes on that. So it's really, you can't always spend that much time, but it gives them an opportunity to play with those concepts, I think, in a really interactive and fun way.
I love that. I think going back to your point earlier about rapid prototyping, it allows you to almost create these rapid prototypes in a way that helps focus on a particular principle, because then, to your point, you're not spending hours and hours on these side projects that need to actually be created to effectively teach the whole concept, but then can drill down almost to what's most important. So I really appreciate that. And I wanted to dive into, Matt, one of your points that you were making earlier about how students approach this new tool and the mindset that we have going into it. So I wanted to kind of hail back to one of our conversations that we had previously, that there are some educators who are looking at AI almost with this fixed mindset of, oh, this is not a tool we've used before, we're not really sure how to approach it, and how to help students find ways to embrace AI as a tool and not be kind of scared to implement it as part of their design process. So Rudy, I wanted to come to you first in thinking about that. How can we expand students' approach to embrace AI as a tool without having it almost overtake their creative process or having them be overwhelmed by it?
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases, it's probably not going to be the students. I think the students will probably be more open to doing that. It's going to be more the educators and maybe the administrators to some extent too. But it always comes down to kind of literacy, right? It's like understanding what are the appropriate tools, what are the appropriate ways to give attribution to the work that you're using. And a lot of those things aren't figured out yet. So it's kind of like the Wild West when you're using these tools. And then is it really the most appropriate thing, or is it just the easiest thing, right? Because sometimes something comes back and it looks kind of good enough, but maybe it's not quite exactly what you need for that given scenario. I think it's a great question, and I wish I had like the perfect answer for it, but I think it's a multifaceted and challenging scenario, and a lot of it is going to be not the students, but the people, educating the students and certifying the students' work.
Yeah. So in thinking about how you've approached it in the classroom, are you excited about using this tool? What are some of the barriers you think educators are going to come across in implementing AI as part of a design curriculum?
I think, first clear guidelines, having, whether it's a syllabus or learning credentials or whatever the end thing that comes out of that process is going to be, like figuring out how AI fits into that and how it's going to be evaluated and be assessed throughout the process is good both for the educational institution, which, it's business is credentialing. That's what universities do, right? At the end, you get a diploma and you get course credits, and that's
Yeah.
credentialing is really important for universities, but also for the students in terms of what are their learning outcomes, what are their personal career goals when they finish, what are the sorts of things they want to learn, and are they still going to learn those things when they're relying on AI technologies to help them follow that path?
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. Matt, any thoughts from you about expanding the mindset around AI in the classroom?
Yeah, I now this could be 100% fake image I saw, but I saw an image of mathematicians and math teachers picketing when the Texas Instrument calculators came out. And they were like, oh, it's going to ruin math classes, and it's going to, the advent of the personal computer, people are going to go, well, I'm not going to use this. I can pull out my cell phone, which is invisible. Pretty impressive. But having this, anytime there's new technology, rightfully so, and I get it, we've been indoctrinated with movies and all these oh no scenarios, but we tend to fear it. We tend to fight new things. Humans are creatures of habit, right? And there's actually something called the compass of shame. My wife is a brilliant mental health therapist, but the compass of shame is whenever we're kind of approached with something that we're not comfortable with, or we don't agree with, we either attack others, we hide, we turn to bad things in life, right? And I think that's just human, and that's not right or wrong in the sense of it. But from a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, I did see a lot of this happen when things came out. People fear the unknown. And just like humans, and like all of us in this room, we've made mistakes. We have to grow, we have to evolve, we have to learn. And technology is no different. And I think, I'd like to kind of approach it by that standpoint and say, all things have flaws. And some of the flaws are really big, not just in AI. If we could, you could, talk about the internet, right? And you could go, oh, there's some bad things that are negatively influencing stuff. But, all of that really comes back to us as humans and having self-awareness, right? If our students, and that's what's so great about, again, I like to come at it with a growth mindset, with kind of like, what can we do to not like completely change how we're making art, but how does this benefit me? And if it doesn't benefit me, I don't need to use it. I have, colleagues at the School of Visual Arts and Design who don't ever need to touch a computer to make art. And their art is fantastic. Like they can paint, they can draw, they can use charcoal. I have a colleague of mine, and I'm not going to name them out on this, but he will sit there with coffee and dip in his coffee and paint while we're in meetings. And it's brilliant looking work. But all of that, even if we talk about the advent of, the paintbrush all the way to all of a sudden Photoshop came out, right? If we kind of continue to have a fixed mindset, that growth will be limited. Instead, understand that technology doesn't have to control us. We are in the driver's seat. And that's, going into that kind of second part of your question too. That's where us as educators, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what we do versus what we really do. And what we, anyone can learn how to push these buttons, right? They can take the training courses, they can, and a shameless plug, but they can get certified as Certiport, right? They can get all of those base foundation elements, but thinking how you use the button, thinking what you do, understanding the why behind what you're doing has nothing to do, honestly, on how you make it, right? It's about what you're doing, who you're impacting, how to take it to the next step. And so I think, if you kind of look at it at that positive output, it can it can help speed things along. And again, and if you're uncomfortable, that's fine.
Mm.
But I tell my students, try not to be cynical when something that you don't understand comes about. Listen, take note of the good and the bad. And the best you can do, and all colleges are good about this, is you're getting tons of information from different sources. You have to process it based on where you're from, your upbringing, your biases, and you have to make what you think is the right decision. And I think in this case, it's a lot easier to do that if you have a growth mindset and you think about, okay, how is this a benefit? Because if you start going, how is this a negative? Oh, it's going to be toxic. It's going to be negative. You're going to go, here comes the T2, the Terminator is coming for me. So, yeah.
I like that. And I think not everyone approaches it with that growth mindset, but to your point, it's not necessarily a tool that every artist, that every designer will need to use.
Yeah.
It depends kind of on your approach and the tools that you plan to use. So I wanted to get into some kind of forecasting that I've seen as we've been researching this topic. So there are a lot of experts that are saying that AI will shift designers and creators' focus from artistic creation to curation. So I wanted to see, do you agree with that? Do you disagree? And kind of what are your thoughts around that? So Matt, we'll come to you first.
Yeah, I disagree with that. I think it's going to challenge a lot of people to kind of say, okay, what have I been doing and what should I be doing? There's a great phrase, I think it's Ed Capnell, that says limits bring us to new heights of creativity. And this isn't necessarily a limit. It's almost the opposite. It's almost like, here's the world. You can create anything you can type and visualize. And I think, sure, there's going to be people who get stuck. And with any good technology, that happens. It's just, I see it more as an evolution. So again, if I say the old switchboard operator for phones, we don't have that anymore, but we have other things that have come about, right? We have people who are doing the fiber cables, and we have people who are working on the cell devices, stuff like that. So that operator goes away, but it's less than like, oh, we're replacing the job of an artist, and more that it's changing. And again, maybe we get to a point where, sure, it makes the art for us, but does that matter in the end? It depends what you're making. Right? If you're making a painting, and I'm sitting, you can't see, but I'm sitting in front of a giant painting on my wall in front of me. It's a lovely lakeside scene with a beautiful tree. I don't know who painted this. I probably bought it at some home store, but it makes me feel relaxed. And when I teach and, I'm answering the same question 1,000 times in a row, I can look up at this lovely lake and go, right? So the purpose of art in its truest form is the communication between the viewer and the participant, or me as the artist. If I still want to paint and do things on my own without AI, and that's my release and that's my kind of meditation, I can still do that. So to say it's just to go to that curatorial status, I think that's like lessening, and this is not your phrasing, but I think that's like lessening what we are as artists. Artists are so much more than that. We're visual communicators, we're visual storytellers, we're there's a little bit of mental health therapy in that, right? there's in all of history, the artists have been there to kind of move kind of the needle forward. And this tool is not going to change that.
Well, we'll see if Rudy agrees or not.
And disagree.
If we have a dissenting opinion, that makes the conversation that much more interesting. And in fact, I would love to hear people in the chat, to hear everyone else's thoughts about this as well. But Rudy, we'll come to you. Do you see AI as shifting it from creation to curation, or do you agree with Matt that it's going to be a much more expansive tool?
I always cherish the opportunity to disagree with Matt publicly. But in this particular case, I have to agree with him. And in fact, I would go a step further maybe and say that a lot of art and design already are a process of curation without AI. And I think Matt's points about kind of constraints, that's so much of the artistic design process, is like you're working with these constraints, you're taking a larger set of materials and trying to distill them somehow into what is essential to communicate whatever it is you're trying to communicate. But there's also this notion of self-curation and exploration. And the most powerful art I've seen in our program has been really when students are looking at, how do I express my identity through my art? Or how do I interrogate myself somehow, to really explore things that might be embedded in my psyche. Like, I don't think that's going to be replaced by AI. I think there's
Yeah.
still a role for that. It's just, how is it going to be changed by the technology? And
Yeah.
again, going back to Matt's points about the TI, the calculator,
Mhm.
you can go back even farther than that and look at writing, right? And what what Plato said about writing, how writing was going to degrade argumentation, and we would no longer, have conversations anymore because now we have writing, and it's sort of taking away from the purity of what human communication is. Well, no, we have different forms of argumentation with the technology now, and we're able to like write things down that can carry forward for generations, and we have all these benefits. And I think with AI, we haven't even figured out what all of those benefits are going to be. I would suspect that we're going to be creating in new ways now that we haven't been creating before. And sure, curation is involved in that process, but I don't think it's going to completely remove the creative spirit from artists, because there's one thing I know about managing artists for the last 7 years. It's that they're very creative, and they will find their way around constraints, whether they're bureaucratic or artistic. And I think that's one of the most amazing things about artists, is that they're really nonlinear thinkers, and they think really differently from.
Yeah.
I always follow the rules when my boss tells me.
It's okay if you don't, Matt. You don't have to tell us that. We'll
Don't
love
tell
you
him.
regardless. And I appreciate that you brought that up, especially the point about creativity. I think that being able to find new and creative ways to use the tool is essentially what the design and artistic process is all about, is being able to find a unique approach to express, to your point, whatever message it is that you're trying to convey. And so I think the strengths that come with using AI are maybe different, right, than those that are used with other tools. So I wanted to kind of maybe project a little bit, or even based on your past experiences, what strengths do artists and designers need to be able to leverage AI effectively? So Rudy, I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the traditional things that they already need to know are still going to play a role when working with AI technology. So things like a knowledge of art history, understanding kind of genres of art and trends and movements in art, and how has art connected to society, and all of those sort of interesting connections that situate art kind of more carefully within the broader socio-political context of civilization, right? I mean, art is not just art. Art is central to how civilization has evolved.
Yeah.
But also fundamental knowledge of the craft, right? Art being lines, shapes, forms, colors, contrast, lighting, like I said earlier, kind of the ability to feed those things into the prompts in a way that generates the type of thing you're trying to produce at the end of it. I think that broader literacy about what an artist is, and how things come together, and what things are aesthetically pleasing and what things are not, and the value and use for both of those different types of expressions, as well as many other types of expressions that you can create with art. So I don't necessarily see anything being taken away from the traditional arts education, but I do see kind of a need for all of those things, plus maybe a focus on procedural literacy, right? Just understanding essentially how iterative design works when you have algorithms that are working with the keywords and evolving things based on kind of multiple generations of revision. I think all of those skills could be really useful.
Well, I love that it's almost taking students into the driver's seat of becoming the teacher of art, right? It forces them to be able to tell the computer, tell the code, this is what I want to create. And that forces them to know those basics almost on a master level, because if you're not able to tell them precisely what you need, you're not going to get the output that you're looking for. So it really puts students kind of in that teacher position to be able to show the skills that they have and show kind of that mastery, which I think is really valuable. Matt, I know you had some different thoughts from what we have talked about previously as well. So what strengths do you think artists need, and even designers in general, to be able to leverage AI effectively?
Yeah, I think, I follow this gentleman, Jamie Brindle, on Instagram, and he does a lot of advice about young artists trying to get into freelancing. And he always says that the best communicator often gets the job, not the best practitioner. And I think that's truly the case. And art is visual communication, like I previously mentioned, but there's so many other facets to communication that are going to help with AI that we kind of touched upon. So that, again, prompt writing and the ability to kind of backwards engineer something, backwards engineer an idea. And in the end, our brain is just a computer. it's processing a bunch of data, right? And it's making, like, your memories are kind of blurry. Like if we all say, hey, draw an apple, we're going to draw a different shaped apple or a different colored apple. And the idea behind kind of what our students need to do is be able to kind of communicate that. So we say this all the time, and a lot of the sessions I've done with you in the past, but 21st century skills are so important. Self-awareness, self-regulation, digital literacy, technical literacy, all of those things are, you know, if they have those, it doesn't matter the tool you put in front of them. If I have somebody who can't communicate, and I've mentioned this kind of example to you when we were previously chatting, but if I say, hey, here's a nail gun, which replaced the hammer and nail, right, to speed up the process to build something, if you put that in the wrong hands, you're going to get shot with a nail gun. And the same thing goes with AI. It's teaching them to wield the tool appropriately. And to understand that there are ramifications for your actions, no matter what you do, what tool you use, what, if you're a designer, a doctor with a scalpel versus a laser, that, you know, it doesn't replace that, the human need for communication and connection. And so, you know, I think if anything, you know, again, we're just dictating and streamlining, and hopefully the tool gets good enough where it takes the bad stuff out of it. Right. Like I mentioned, doctors, it takes things like introduction to bacteria and all that stuff during surgery. Now they can just do it with a robot, and a lot more people can survive and be saved. So yeah, I think teaching our students those skills is the utmost important, whether we're talking about AI or not. If we don't teach them that, you know, they're going to just go and say, well, I can push this button, but they won't have a reason to.
Yeah. I like the human element just in thinking about AI and any technology in general. It's only as good as the person who's created or leveraged it, right? You have to have that human element to be able to make it work in a way that's beneficial for the people that it's serving. And so I wanted to, this is not something that we talked about in advance, but I wanted to talk about what are the AI tools that you have been using in the classroom, and do you find that some are more effective than others? And then we'll get into one of the questions that was dropped into the chat as well about teaching it for architecture. So Matt, we'll start with you. What are some of the AI tools that you've been using already?
I was fortunate enough to be on the beta of Adobe Firefly. That's been very interesting. You know, so I've been playing around with that. I've actually like developed a lot of my web course imagery, because I would find, like, we've all been there, but either I'm looking for a stock photo or I'm trying to find the perfect, just even a decorative image just to fill like a class on our LMS. And it's been one of those things where, like, well, I really wish I could just find this thing. And I go, wait, I can type that. And then it comes up and I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I use ChatGPT quite frequently, to a point where I've started running things. Like if I'm thinking of a specific, like even the other day, we had an email response we wanted to send out to a massive amount of people. And I ran this, Rudy was on this chat chain, and I kind of said, like, I wrote my version of the email and I go, gosh, it's too gritty, right? There's something about it that even I knew. I was kind of like, this isn't great. Grammarly was giving me like a sad face. And I put it through ChatGPT and I said, listen, this is what we're trying to accomplish. This is what I've written. Can you write it to still, you know, be excited, you know, the readers still be excited about wanting to respond to it and still working with our school? And it gave me a couple, and I went through the process a few times until I started piecemealing this message together to send out to my colleagues. So those are two of the big ones I use. Mainly because just, you know, you have visual, you have text, and it's a great self-editing tool. There's times where I'm super repetitive in my course content, and I will go and say, this is what I wrote. I'll do it a paragraph at a time and say, where am I repeating myself? And where am I not? Like, how would you read this course prompt, and what haven't I specified? And sometimes it gives me great stuff. Other times it doesn't.
I love that. That's awesome. Rudy, any additional tools that you wanted to highlight or mention that you've used?
Also ChatGPT. I've played around with Google Bard a little bit too, and some of the Microsoft chat based. I haven't used the image ones as much, but I know my students have used Midjourney, and there was another big image one. Matt, what was the other one that came out really pretty early, along with
Oh.
Midjourney. Do you remember?
No, I'm terrible.
So primarily the text-based AI
Yeah.
systems are the ones that I've used. Oh,
Oh,
Dali, thank you.
God. Yeah,
Yeah.
there you go. I was about to say.
You have people attending who are helping you out, which I think is
Yes, we appreciate that.
awesome.
Late in the afternoon here in Central Florida.
Yeah. So I wanted to get into some of these questions that have been posted here in the chat, because I know we've talked a lot about visual art, but of course we have design in all its forms. And Rudy, you've talked about gaming and some other things as well. We have an educator here who asked, how could I use AI in my architecture design class? So I wanted to see if you guys had any thoughts about that, or tools maybe that would be beneficial for him to use.
Sure. So I typed that into ChatGPT as we were talking, just to kind of see what it would come up with. And it actually gave a really good response to that. So one of them is generative design. So generating and optimizing a large number of design alternatives based on user-defined parameters, such as site location, building location, budget, and environmental constraints. So this can help architects to explore a wide range of design options and select the best solution based on their criteria. And it gives a list of 7 different things kind of along those lines. So energy efficiency, material selection, predictive maintenance, virtual reality. So it's really depends on the particular type of learning objective, I guess, have at any given moment. But I think there are a lot of ways that it could be useful. And the other thing I've done in my own teaching when I'm kind of exploring a new technology is I ask the students to figure out how could this be useful in the class, given what we're learning at this moment. Go play around with this new technology and bring some ideas back into the classroom. And then we can kind of discuss as a group the pros and the cons of that, and where does it break down, where does it hold up? Because I think sometimes the students know way more about technology than we do. That's a good way to get them engaged.
That's helpful, Rudy. Thank you. Matt, I wanted to see if in working with your multidisciplinary team at Limitless, if you guys have used AI kind of on the 3D design side.
Yeah, so I did mention a little bit about the games, and so we do have a little bit of machine learning happening in there. And so I saw the question in the chat as well about machine learning. AI is a lot of human-based reasoning, is a lot, and AI is really, to me, like it's built so we could understand it, right? Whereas like machine learning is using a ton of algorithms and numbers to kind of make adjustments subtly that the human eye may never see. But we're using a lot of that AI-driven machine learning with our 3D models to kind of create the game, to build the game as we continue to go. So, procedural generation of 3D and whatnot. When it comes to and we're not there yet, but when it comes to things like our bionic arms, so we're giving these kids who have limb difference the choice to design their own prosthetic. And they would kind of pick from some selections, but I imagine a future in which I say, what do you envision your arm to look like? And they tell us. And then we look at that prompt, we put it in, and we get to print their perfect arm. And I'm fine not having to model that. I'm fine if it generates the 3D model, because that's not why I do it.
Right.
I can do it, but the important part is here's your prosthetic to the kid and seeing them go, yeah, this is awesome. So with my multidisciplinary team, we have the computer scientists using it with that machine learning side of things. The engineers are obviously dealing with, I wouldn't even tell you the names of the machines. I'm not allowed to touch them. I'll tell you that much. But, our 3D artists now have the ability to conceptualize video games, to conceptualize 3D models and prosthetics. We work a lot, obviously, with limb-different individuals. So we have one-handed controllers. I did a prompt when Firefly came out, and I said, hey, I'd like to see a series of controllers that can only be used holding it in one hand. And it generated things that made me go, oh my God, we didn't think of that.
Yeah.
And, and I started just putting them into folders, because next time we evolve something, or next time we make an accessibility device, we'll have that ability to kind of reference those as starting points. So, we're working with 9 different UCF colleges, and we have about 50 interns a semester. And I would say 100% of them are smarter than me and know different things than I do. And that's the way it should always be.
Right.
But each of them are using it in their own unique way. Our social team could use it to write posts for social media we want to make sure that we're being empathetic, but we're not feeling sorry for our community, because our people aren't broken. They're amazing. They just happen to have disabilities. So there's a lot of different ways that we can kind of check ourselves in these unique disciplines. And the students are going to find a way, just like I found a way when I was a student, when the internet came out, to infuse it into my studies. They're going to find a way to infuse all this new technology into theirs.
I like that. And I appreciate that you've called out just how it can benefit and kind of expand our mind. We're limited by our own scope of experience. So I think really when it comes down to it, that's the power of AI, is that it allows us to encapsulate the experience of so many different people in the code, and being able to use that regenerative process to be able to create things that we might not have thought of before.
And if
I
you
know
don't
that
use AI, like, couldn't you just like, and I always say this to my students, well, then don't use AI, but maybe have those conversations with real humans.
which brings us perfectly to what we're doing today, right? I think that that's so powerful.
We could write these as prompts, but it's not, this will never go away.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, then I wanted to bring it back, Matt, for what advice would you share with educators looking to prepare students who are future designers, future architects, with AI skills that they'll need for the future?
Yeah. This is kind of funny because I've learned this. I'm a father of 2 very young children, and they watch you. They watch how you react to things. If you don't like a certain food, they don't like that food, unless you're my daughter and she eats everything. But it's something with your students. If you react in a certain way and go, I don't like, and they're going to be closed-minded. They're going to take that as a cue to go, oh, well, he's being closed-minded, whether they like you as a teacher or not. And then they're going to feed off of that. Instead, be open-minded, talk to them about the benefits of it. You don't have to have it in your class. But talk to them about the real reason why you're doing design. When we talk to our friend who's doing architecture, building the paper and cardboard models is part of your whole process, but it's not the only thing. There's a reason, there's the why, there's the inhabitability of the space. There's so many more levels that the layman doesn't understand about all sorts of fields. And I think getting your students to open up and have those conversations makes them kind of go, this is just a thing. This is no different than, I don't have a pencil in front of me, but a pencil or the keyboard, right? This is just another way to kind of get the job done. So that's my best advice for educators. And as you do that, we talk about 21st century skills. We need to practice them too, right? We need to be, I'm self-aware to look at my curriculum and go, I feel it's stagnant. I want another opinion. So I talk to some amazing colleagues I work with at UCF, that Victor and Ashley, and Rudy and I will sit there and talk about grading and how to use, generative text sometimes to help facilitate. How do you grade 160 people in a weekend, right? But still be authentic and give them kind of those learning moments. And so I think it's a combination of all that. But if we're closed-minded and we don't kind of practice those skills and do that growth mindset as well, it's going to become challenging. So my biggest advice to everyone is, no one's forcing you to do anything, right? But embrace new things. I've been so fortunate to work with some really amazing individuals because I said yes. Because I said, I had a group come to me and say, we make superhero bionic arms. And I could have said, you're crazy, see you later. But I said, okay, let's go meet them the next day and the next day and see what they have to offer. And it's been one of the most rewarding moments of my life. So that's my best advice for educators. Go down those paths, go down them with your student. Don't push your student down things. Just be along with them side by side for the good and the bad of it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Matt. Rudy, any final thoughts from you, advice that you would share as it relates to AI and design?
Yeah, I think Matt's advice is great. And I think it's an exciting time to be an artist and a designer. Like, this is really, I wrote my dissertation 20 some odd years ago, and I was looking at AI at the time, and it was things like really basic chat bots and basically parroting things back to you as though the computer was a therapist. And we've come so far from that in the last 20 years to really see what's happening and what's available, not only in the information that's kind of generated back, whether it's art or text or whatever that might be, but also in the kind of things happening in between and the ability to guide a conversation and to understand common sense. Common sense knowledge was a really big problem in AI, and we've come a long way. And just like an example is you see a picture with, you know, people in suits and fancy gowns, and there's one person wearing white. What do we know about the person wearing white? Well, it's likely to be a bride at a wedding. Computers couldn't do that until very recently, but now they can. And the ability for them to understand those things like a human being would understand that visual data is just really exciting, I think. So one thing would be just be open-minded, like Matt's saying, but another would be to understand that these systems are not all one and the same. There's going to be different strengths and advantages of different platforms. And also not all of it is without intent underneath the hood, right? I mean, some of these companies have very specific purposes for designing the tools that they're designing. So kind of that broader ethical awareness about, as I'm interacting with this tool, what data is being collected? Is there a company that's going to have access to my location data, the things that I've done, the things that I'm asking, and use that to sell me products in the future? And do I care? Like all of those things I think are important too. And they really hinge on having an understanding of what's available, but also a literacy to the extent that you can go and kind of really work with different tools and understand their affordances and limitations depending on what you're using. But I guess the biggest advice I would have is to be part of the conversation. Don't just bury your head in the sand, because I don't think AI tools are going away. I think they're going to become even more popular and more broadly used. And we need really exciting, engaged, creative people as part of the conversation. We don't want these decisions just made by technologists and engineers. Not that there's anything wrong with technologists and engineers, but it is a limited perspective. And I think diversity in all things is useful, in particular in this area.
I love that. And to that point, we have some people asking questions in the chat. So Matt, you touched on Firefly. And then I saw that you responded in the chat. Is Firefly the only AI for visual design images right now? What are some other recommendations? So did you want to talk about some of those ones that you recommended?
Yeah, I mean, so Dolly, Mid-Cafe Night Cafe, Mid-Journey, Rudy mentioned that a few times. You know, we're starting, like Rebecca's saying, we're starting to see a lot of these being infused into Adobe products, which is really great. That's exciting in the sense of I saw some that are going to be infused in video creation to kind of streamline some of the things. When I did motion graphics, that took me hours of repetitive movement. Now I can go boop, 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 done. And so, you know, there's a lot of them out there, and I imagine there's just going to be more and more and more. They're going to be available on your mobile devices. They're going to be available, I'm assuming, on your TVs at some point. Like it's, you know, years ago, if we said the internet would be available on our TV, we would go, right?
Why? Yeah.
That's crazy. And like now you can go anywhere. And again, it's, you know, so to answer that question, yeah, there's quite a few. Some are free, some are paid for. It's going to be commercialized. It already is. So it's just something with, just like internet and everything else, is going to happen.
Well, and I appreciate, Rudy, your point as well, that you have to kind of look under the hood and see which one works for you, right? Not all of them operate the same way. You have to be able to test a few out and see what works. And I loved this follow-up question to that. Where can we get more training on all of this? So I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on where to continue this conversation, because I do think that it is valuable. And to your point, Rudy, it's not something that is going away. So where can we learn a little bit more?
Matt, you want to handle that one?
Yeah, I think that's kind of, and to be honest with you, that's an untapped resource. So, you know, I hate to use the word side hustle, but Rudy, we got to get on this. It's funny because we were having this whole conversation about ChatGPT and curriculum the other day, and my colleague Jason popped in and he was like, should we do this in the faculty meeting? He was really excited. And I kind of was like, well, we have a lot to do in those meetings, but you know, maybe. And I think there's value in that. So I imagine there's going to be down the road, maybe even certifications for this. And there's going to be, just like I'm doing a professional development for Adobe later today. We're going to have, you know, I hope to see they start having professional development for things like AI. So again, untapped resource. When you ask that question, my brain's going, ooh, you know,
this is something we should already start working on, right?
Yeah, you're going to have college classes appearing. I mean, there's already college classes on AI, but you're going to have college classes, you know, I'm assuming in the art fields and creative fields coming up in the next couple semesters. they'd be silly not to, because,
Yeah.
you know, it's going to have to be infused into the curriculum because the students are going to use it no matter what.
And I would also say just create accounts on some of these platforms and play around with them, experiment, you know, try typing in different prompts. And, you know, the nice thing about ChatGPT is that it will store your prior conversations. So you can resume any of those prior conversations too. So you can really experiment in different ways. Just, you can learn a lot just by kind of using some of these tools on your own.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much. And I really just wanted to say thank you to both of you for all of the wisdom and advice that you've shared. We really are so excited about this topic. It's definitely something that, to your point, is kind of like the Wild West. It's just so new and there's a lot of opportunities. So we're really glad that we got to be in kind of one of these first conversations around this topic. I did want to just wrap up with just a few announcements before we close out. Our first announcement is that in addition to these free training sessions, we also offer a boot camp as part of this program. So if you're interested in testing out the certification, we would love for you to be able to do that. So we have curriculum practice tests and the actual exam. So if you want to test that out before you offer it to your students, we definitely want you to do that. So if you're interested in adding the bootcamp to your experience with your registration, you can email certifiedacademy@pearson.com. And you can also read more about the bootcamp on our blog, which I will just drop here into the chat really quickly. Our second announcement is that this event over the course of this whole first part of the year is just a great build up to our Certified Educator Conference that we are hosting this year in Orlando, Florida. So right in Rudy and Matt's neck of the woods, which we're super excited about. That will be taking place on June 26th through the 28th. So if you're looking to add to your experience or maybe even continue this conversation that we've had today and connect with some additional educators who are in the world of design and architecture and engineering, we would love to have you there. So if you want to learn more about that, that's at certified.certiport.com. And then the third announcement is that this isn't the last session, luckily, for this series. We're going to be doing a deep dive into the Adobe Certified Professional Program next week. So if you're in the visual, graphic design, video design world, we would encourage you to attend next week's session so you can learn a little bit more, to Matt's point, just about the certification program itself. So thank you so much, everyone, for spending time with us this afternoon. We really appreciate all of the wonderful thoughts that have been shared today, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. Thank you so much, Rudy and Matt, and everyone for being here today. We really appreciate you.
Thanks, Anna.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks for having us. Take care.